Hey everyone, this is James, and I want to go through how AI is going to affect test automation in the future. So I want to break it down into essentially four separate categories. I see that AI is going to have effect in how we create tests, how those tests are executed, how those tests are modified, and actually analyzing the results of those tests. So if we take each one of those separately, let's look at how we can create tests. At the moment, most of the tools will record your actions and then turn those into tests. Now, some of those recorders have become a little bit smarter in terms of how they find and interact with those elements. That's almost also how AI is used in executing tests. That's been stage one. Stage two is going to be how can we automatically generate those tests? There have been some advances in this field. Test.ai was one of the companies that was working on this, where they were trying to use essentially a reinforcement method to spider through the tests. Now, there is a good chance that we can use a technology like an LLM as an oracle, or use improved reinforcement learning mechanisms to now actually build tests on the fly, especially in a narrow vertical. So it might be that you have test generations for types of applications, right? So it might be smart enough that we train it on how e-commerce sites work, and then it can build out tests for all e-commerce sites. So I think creating tests in the way that we have in the past is really going to change. We're already seeing LLMs being able to generate unit tests and actually build out mocks for integration tests as well. And they can even build out pages for UI tests. Those are not reliable yet, but it's just going to be a matter of time before this space changes completely, and the way that we currently build tests is sort of forgotten. The next step is executing those tests. So once we have them, how do we execute them in a manner where we're getting best bang for buck? How are we going to execute them across like a range of devices, a range of applications, or our browsers to make sure that we're getting full coverage or the fastest coverage for those changes? And additionally, like what can we do during that execution to make sure that those tests are actually passing and failing in the right way? Originally, when companies started to build out AI to create tests, the tests would essentially run, but there was no understanding of whether those tests passed or failed. It was really just was an error thrown up. And that's, we saw Google almost maybe 10 years ago build out their monkey test system for Android, which would just hit every single button in the app, but was really just looking for failures or slowdowns, rather than actually meaningfully testing the application. We've started to see visual testing come into this this execution part. So now, rather than necessarily having like your standard verification steps, you might have, checks to make sure that the visual aspects are the same for end-to-end tests. We also might have some improvements in sort of like how we find those elements and automatically healing those tests, right? So if an element is moved, now with those smart recorders and those sort of AI-based tools, that doesn't necessarily mean that the test has to break when an element moves. The question is, how is that going to work on every website, right? It has to be reliable. I think that's a problem with some of those earlier testing tools where they started to leverage AI, but it wasn't perfect. And if it's not like good enough, then it's sort of like you lose. It's like the boy who cried wolf. If it fails a couple of times, then you lose trust in a system like that. So then I also think that AI will be used to modify tests. So at the moment, when a test runs, if it fails, we don't really have any way of modifying those tests automatically. So if you think about it in the future, we might be able to suggest how a test should be changed based on the commits that have actually come through previously. So it might be we specifically see in the commits that they're changing the login button to a log space in button, or that they're moving just a single sign-on. Therefore, the test which was testing that login button is no longer relevant. So it might be that when we see that in the commits, that it actually recommends to remove that test or to change that test to use single sign-on. And it might even be that the tests are smart enough to, well, self-heal in a way. And at the moment, the way that self-healing works is it will actually like refine the element. But what happens if the test is smart enough that it's seen these type of changes being made, so that then it can recommend that you, I don't know, change the flow of the test. So it's noticed that there are suddenly an additional pop-up for something like a new GDPR. And therefore, all of the tests or all of the logins, now you have to accept this. So the test is now smart enough to know that this is a standard piece and that we should recommend that the test changes in this specific way. That's going to really help people keep maintainable tests or maintain their tests. And then we're going to see teams spending, one of the major problems with testing in the past is like you have this nirvana of building up these automated tests, but they take so much effort to keep reliable that, you know, companies feel like they're not actually getting value from those tests. And then the final state that I think is important that AI will actually be able to help with is analyzing the results of those tests. Is this a failure in a similar way to what I talked about before? Is this test failing because of a change that was expected, right? Is it failing because we no longer have that piece of functionality or there's now a new flow? Who should actually look at the results of this failure? Do we know which developer caused that specific failure? If we're not running on every single commit, maybe we need to specify which commit actually caused this bug. Or maybe we even need to automatically assign that bug. And then what other, I guess, analysis can we do on the results to actually make sure that we're putting meaningful feedback back in the hands of the teams, rather than just having a wide range of failures that don't really make any sense. As we train models on these specific environments, we should understand them better and then be able to actually put out output that really helps teams. You might see AI used in other ways. We might see AI be almost supplemental to testing, where it's used in the CI, or there's a chatbot that's available that will help you automatically execute tests based on, you know, you typing in things, or might pull in results from the latest run that you've specifically asked it for. So you might be in a meeting and then suddenly someone's like, oh, how is this feature going? And you ask the chatbot essentially that exact question, and it pulls back, oh, these are the stories. These are the progress of the stories. This is the velocity. This is when we expect it to be done. And this is the results of the last tests. So I can see AI helping testers in that way. I don't think that AI is going to replace testers, you know, in the next 5 years, but I think it's definitely going to help us actually get the value from automation that has been promised for a long time. So I'm excited to see the change in the industry as these sort of things come through, and I hope you guys are too. So yeah, I'm going to be posting more on this channel, more about AI, some of it for testing, some of it just in general. And I hope that you guys sort of, you know, like, subscribe, all that type of thing. And then let's hopefully have some comments and go through those. I'll be posting next, really probably in more depth about LLMs. And then maybe on each one of those particular topics with singling out more detail, how you might even be able to make miniature projects in this area if you're interested. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. Appreciate it.